Hi Heather, thank you for joining me here today. First of all, I'll just ask you to state your name and spell it out for me.
So Heather Holtz, Heatherholtz.
Thank you. Hi Aaron, thank you for talking to me today about your life over in Malawi. I'd just like to have you state your name for me and spell it out.
Sure, my full name is Erin Nyenyezi Nitz. First name is Erin, Aaron. Second name is Nyenyezi, Nyeyezi, which is an African word for star. And then my last name is Nitz, Nitz.
Okay. So I'm going to be asking you a couple of questions about your life over in Africa, more specifically Malawi.
Okay.
So the first question I'm going to ask you is, where were you born?
I was born in Malawi at a place called Nkoma Hospital. It's a small town and kind of off in the woods, and that's where I was born. But I initially grew up in Zambia, but I was just born there because there was a better hospital there.
So the first question I'm going to ask you is, where were you born?
So I was born in the north of Malawi. Malawi is a small country in Africa, in a smallish town called Mzuzu. And there are like three main cities in all of Malawi, and of the three main, Mzuzu is the smallest.
What was the first school that you went to?
It was called Chapada International School. It was close by our house. It was a very small school. There were very few people. I only had one classmate, but it was a great school. We bonded well with everyone of all age groups. And my sister, a year older than me, she had no classmates, and my friend, Nathan, you only had one. You were the only one in your class too. So it was a great school.
The first school that you went to in Malawi?
So the first school was an international school in Blantyre. Blantyre is the city in the south of Malawi. St. Andrew's International School was a really cool school where we had school uniforms that were like beige but had animal printings on them. And I can still remember going into my reception classroom at like 4 years old and what it looks like.
Would you say that it was hard to fit in to a certain extent as you started going to bigger schools, like when you moved to Malawi?
Well, when I moved to Malawi, we went to a bigger school. With any new school, I was nervous about, not so much about fitting in, but just finding friends and getting used to the new curriculum. But I didn't really have any problems like fitting right in and making friends and doing well in school.
Would you say that you got to meet people from all over the place that gave you some interesting experiences?
Oh yeah, I had friends from all over the world: Germany, Zimbabwe, a lot of Indian friends, South Africa, England. I really enjoyed the international aspect of it. We celebrated that at our school every year. We'd have International Day, eat each other's food, and celebrate the flags, and it was really interesting to just hear input from all different places around the world.
So, would you say that it was hard to fit in at the school that you went to, or the schools that you went to as you got older? Was it hard to fit in with the culture?
Honestly, no. Like, I didn't know anything different, so I didn't have to adjust. It was just like the same transition that I think any student going from their parents' home to school would have. And then when I switched schools when I was about 8 or 9 years old, that was a transition as well, but it was, I would say, a normal transition if somebody switched schools in America. Yeah, I was American and not many other people were, but that was totally okay. We didn't really notice.
What are some of your favorite childhood memories?
One of my favorite places to go is the South Luangwa Game Park in Zambia, and we went there many times as a child. I love seeing the animals there and just being surrounded by God's creation, and it's a beautiful place, and I love being there with family and friends. I also really enjoyed spending time with you as our neighbor in Zambia. Have lots of good memories playing in the mud. We played outside a lot. Nice weather, of course. More so in Malawi. I played volleyball a lot with some friends and played lots of games with our neighbors there, the Nitzes. We played board games and outside games, and those are really my favorite childhood memories. Oh, also Easter retreats, going to special places and seeing all the African missionaries getting together. It was really great.
So, what would you say are some of your favorite childhood memories?
Oh, wow. I have memories from the house that I grew up in from like ages 3 to 8, which is in the south of Malawi. It was a really cool house where it was on a steep hill and a really big property. So we would often like scale the little walls to get to the top and then do like rock climbing down, and we had all this vegetation, like we had cacti around it and interesting birds that would come. So it was like a real wilderness for me, and it was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the biggest cultural differences between the U.S. and Malawi that really stand out to you?
Well, first of all, there's way less people on the streets. Everything is farther apart. Everything is cleaner generally, and it's just more, I guess, modernized. The people are more secluded, more individualized. They don't show as much respect to elders sometimes that I'm more used to in Malawi, where respect is very important. Especially clothing. The women there wear long skirts, but here we can wear short shorts and it doesn't matter. There's a lot of fresh produce there that I like, but here it's more store-bought, like older stuff. Well, there's a lot more variety here, but a lot more prepackaged stuff that I don't like as much. So at home we did a lot more home cooking, which I liked. And I miss mangoes, which are good in Malawi.
So would you say that mangoes are one of your favorite foods?
Yes.
So what are some of the biggest cultural differences that pop out to you the most between the U.S. and Malawi?
There are a lot. In fact, when I first moved here, it seemed like everything was different. People would ask me that, and I'd be like, you know, it's the smells and the sights and the culture. There's so much that's different. But I'd say the biggest differences are obviously the affluency in America. It changes everything, but it changes people's sort of attitudes on life a little bit too. And I wouldn't say that it's in a negative way, actually. Sometimes we think that, like, in more affluent cultures or societies, we squander our money or something, or take it for granted. Well, I think that you just have more money, so you live as if you do, and I think that's totally fine. But that's a huge shock to me that everything is nice. You know, everything is clean comparatively, and things, when they break, they don't stay broken.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm fine with what I grew up with, but it's nice to be in a country where things do like run a bit smoother. So I've grown to appreciate America a little bit. The biggest probably difference though is just culture, which is such a general term, but the way that we interact with one another, the way we think about each other, the expectations we have, they're so different.
Would you say it's a common occurrence to meet people that don't speak a lot or don't speak any English whatsoever over in Malawi?
Fairly common. The majority of people in the more urban areas do speak English. Not very well oftentimes, but we can go to town, buy things just fine because most people do speak English. But my dad, who speaks the local languages, uses the language there, Chichewa, very much because he goes to more rural areas, villages, and rural churches that requires him to speak Chichewa. Sometimes it is difficult to talk with some people because they don't understand your English and you don't even understand their English because it's not as good, but I don't know the language myself either. I wish I did because we were surrounded by English speaking people at school especially. So that's mostly why I don't know it.
Would you say it's a common occurrence to meet people in Malawi that don't speak English or are not very fluent in English, or like encountering that language barrier?
Yeah, I guess it depends where you are in the country and where you are in the city, and just how, like, who do you have to interact with, because at our schools we're taught in English, but we have people from all over the world, and they're used to being taught in English in other international schools, but that doesn't mean English is their first language. So growing up, like, just because English was my first language, I was the human dictionary for all of my friends. None of my friends spoke English as their first language. So it wasn't necessarily considered a barrier within the school, because we all sort of existed in the state of, you sort of change English to adapt to each other because we don't speak it properly according to, what we would in America.
What would you say is the hardest thing to adjust to when you come back to the States from Malawi, or vice versa?
Because I've traveled so much, I don't feel it particularly difficult to adapt back to the different culture and different areas, but well, first of all, the weather. I mean, I'm used to coming here in the summer, but now I've lived through a few winters and not a huge fan of it. But I guess just being able to wear shorts is fun, but other adjustments, such as I can't talk to people as much about my experiences because it's not as relatable, and there's a lot of things that I don't know about the States, like especially pop culture type things, or famous people, or just very American things that I just don't know about, and then when people mention it, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't mind it. Like, I don't mind learning about what people experience here, and if people are interested, I'm very happy to tell them things about Malawi, but generally people don't ask that much either, so it can be hard then to relate completely with people.
What is the hardest thing for you to adjust to when either going from the US to Malawi or vice versa?
So coming to America, it's really striking because it's like actually a physical reaction. Once I get used to it after a couple of weeks, my nervous system calms down. But like pretty much as soon as I set down in America, it's this avalanche of stimuli, and my like fight and flight mode for my nervous system just goes on immediately. So your body is in this state of stress, just because there's so much stimuli, there's so many people. People don't move at the same pace as in Malawi. And so that adjustment, it makes you feel like, whoa, something is wrong, like I have to be on high alert. And eventually you learn, okay, like after a couple weeks I can shut down my sensors to some of these things. Like, this is actually normal, train your body, this is normal, so I don't need to be on high alert. Going back to Malawi, I don't know if there's a really big adjustment that I have to make, because it's just going home. So again, there's the pace of life, which is an adjustment. You're like, what do I do with myself? But eventually that has its huge charms too, and I love the pace of life there. So I'd say that's one of the hardest things.
What would you say is the most commonly asked question that you get about Malawi when you do come back here, or especially when you were younger and you would come back here?
Yeah, we usually get questions about our living conditions and sometimes about animals, like wild animals. There's no lions in our backyard. We don't ride elephants to school. Yes, we go to game parks that contain these wild animals, and yes, we've been blessed to be surrounded by wildlife, being a foot from a lion, things like that. But in the home, we have a comfortable home. The electricity doesn't always work, but we don't live in a mud hut. We drive vehicles, heavy-duty ones, Land Cruiser, because we need to get through some rough roads. But yeah, sometimes people ask, do you live in a mud hut or things like that, but no.
Okay, well, thank you for your time.
No problem.